The most extreme weather events in history. An entire year without summer killed 200,000 people across the globe. Temperatures dropped so low that crops failed worldwide and snow fell in July. In 1816, a volcanic eruption changed Earth's weather for an entire decade. Today we're exploring the most extreme weather events that actually happened, disasters so devastating they changed the course of human history. From volcanic winters that caused global famine to hurricanes that erased entire islands from maps. The year without a summer, 1816. You're living in New England during June 1816, expecting warm summer weather. Instead, you wake up to frost covering your crops and snow falling outside your window. The temperature reads 35 degrees Fahrenheit in the middle of what should be summer. Mount Tambora in Indonesia had erupted the previous year, ejecting 38 cubic miles of rock, ash, and gases into the atmosphere. This created a global volcanic winter that blocked sunlight for months. Average global temperatures dropped by 1.3 degrees Fahrenheit, enough to trigger worldwide climate chaos. Crops failed across Europe and North America. In Ireland, failed harvests led to famine and a typhus outbreak that killed 100,000 people. Swiss families abandoned their farms and emigrated to America. The year became known as 1800 and froze to death. Mary Shelley was trapped indoors by the gloomy, cold weather during her Swiss vacation. The perpetual darkness and supernatural atmosphere inspired her to write Frankenstein. Lord Byron penned his poem Darkness, describing a world where the bright sun was extinguished. This wasn't just weather, no, it was a global catastrophe that triggered famines, mass migration, and social upheaval across 3 continents. The Great Hurricane of 1780, the deadliest Atlantic storm. You're on the Caribbean island of Martinique when barometric pressure drops to the lowest level ever recorded. Winds exceed 200 miles per hour as the most powerful hurricane in Atlantic history makes direct landfall. The storm surge rises 25 feet above normal sea level. This hurricane killed over 22,000 people across the Caribbean, more than any other Atlantic storm in recorded history. On Barbados, the winds were so violent that they stripped bark from trees and feathers from chickens. Stone buildings constructed to withstand centuries crumbled in hours. The British and French naval fleets engaged in battles during the American Revolution were completely destroyed. Over 100 warships sank, effectively ending naval operations in the Caribbean for months. The hurricane altered the course of the Revolutionary War by eliminating both European powers' naval presence. On St. Vincent, the indigenous Carib people were almost completely wiped out, not by colonization, but by this single weather event. Entire villages vanished, leaving no trace except scattered stone foundations. Survivors described the eye of the hurricane lasting for hours, with complete calm followed by winds from the opposite direction that finished destroying anything that survived the first assault. The Dust Bowl, 1930s American ecological disaster. You're a farmer in Oklahoma on April 14, 1935. Black Sunday. You see a wall of dust 1,000 feet high approaching from the horizon, moving at 60 miles per hour. The temperature drops 50 degrees in minutes as the dust cloud blocks out the sun completely. Severe drought combined with poor farming practices created the worst ecological disaster in American history. Topsoil from 100 million acres was stripped away by winds, creating dust storms that reached Washington, D.C. and New York City. Ships 300 miles offshore reported dust on their decks. The dust penetrated everything: homes, schools, even refrigerators sealed tight. People wore wet sheets over their faces to breathe. Hospitals filled with patients suffering from dust pneumonia. Lungs clogged with fine soil particles that caused permanent respiratory damage. 3 million people abandoned their farms and migrated west, creating the largest internal migration in American history. John Steinbeck's The Grapes of Wrath immortalized these Dust Bowl refugees, who lost everything to weather and poor land management. Dust storms were so severe that they buried cars, covered 2-story houses to their rooftops, and created static electricity that killed car engines. Drivers couldn't see their own headlights in the dust clouds. The Great Galveston Hurricane, 1900. You're in Galveston, Texas on September 8, 1900, experiencing the deadliest natural disaster in American history. Storm surge 15 feet high crashes over the barrier island. Winds reach 145 miles per hour, and the entire city disappears under salt water. Over 8,000 people died in a single day, more than the Chicago fire, San Francisco earthquake, and Johnstown flood combined. The storm surge was so powerful it moved the entire barrier island inland by several hundred feet, permanently changing the Texas coastline. Bodies floated in the Gulf of Mexico for weeks afterward. Survivors burned thousands of corpses on funeral pyres because burial was impossible in the flooded, salt-contaminated soil. The city's infrastructure was completely obliterated. No building escaped damage. Isaac Klein, the local Weather Bureau chief, initially dismissed hurricane warnings. He rode through the city on horseback morning of the storm, telling residents they were safe. By evening, his own house was destroyed, his wife was dead, and he was clinging to debris in the storm surge. The hurricane's aftermath changed American weather forecasting forever. The disaster led to improved hurricane tracking systems and the first systematic hurricane warnings along the Gulf Coast. The European heat wave of 2003, modern temperature. You're living in Paris during August 2003, when temperatures reach 104 degrees Fahrenheit for days. Your apartment has no air conditioning because summers are normally mild. The heat index climbs to 115 degrees with no relief at night. This heat wave killed over 70,000 people across Europe. In France alone, 15,000 died, mostly elderly people trapped in superheated apartments. Morgues overflowed and bodies were stored in refrigerated warehouses normally used for food. Rivers dried up completely. The Thames, Rhine, and Danube reached record low levels. Nuclear power plants shut down because cooling water became too hot to use safely. Forest fires burned across Portugal, Spain, and southern France simultaneously. The heat was so extreme it buckled railway tracks, melted asphalt roads, and caused massive power grid failures as air conditioners overwhelmed electrical systems. London recorded its highest temperature ever, 101.3 degrees Fahrenheit. Agricultural losses exceeded $13 billion as crops withered across the continent. Wine harvests occurred in August instead of September because grapes were literally cooking on the vines. The Great Blizzard of 1888, the White Hurricane. You're in New York City on March 12, 1888, when 50 inches of snow falls in 36 hours. Winds reach 80 miles per hour, creating snowdrifts 40 feet high. The temperature drops to minus 6 degrees Fahrenheit with wind chills of minus 40. The storm paralyzed the entire Northeast for a week. Telegraph lines snapped, cutting communication between cities. Trains were buried completely, stranding passengers for days without heat or food. In New York City, people tunneled through snowdrifts to reach their neighbors. Over 400 people died, many freezing to death just feet from their homes because they couldn't navigate the whiteout conditions. Rescuers found bodies buried in snowdrifts weeks later, some still holding onto fence posts they'd grabbed while trying to find their way. The blizzard created permanent changes in urban planning. New York City moved all telegraph and electrical lines underground. The disaster led to the development of the modern subway system because elevated trains had failed completely during the storm. Fire departments couldn't reach burning buildings. Hospitals ran out of supplies because delivery was impossible. The storm essentially shut down civilization for an entire week across multiple states. Cyclone Bhola, 1970, Bangladesh. You're living in the Ganges Delta when Cyclone Bhola makes landfall with 185-mile-per-hour winds and a 35-foot storm surge. The flat geography offers no protection as the Bay of Bengal empties onto the land, creating a wall of water that travels 100 miles inland. This cyclone killed between 300,000 and 500,000 people, the deadliest tropical cyclone in recorded history. Entire islands with populations of 20,000 were completely submerged, leaving no survivors. The storm surge moved so fast that people climbed trees only to have the trees submerged in salt water. The disaster sparked the Bangladesh Liberation War. The Pakistani government's inadequate response to the cyclone convinced East Pakistan, now Bangladesh, that they needed independence. Weather became a catalyst for the creation of an entire nation. Salt contamination from the storm surge poisoned farmland for years afterward. Wells became undrinkable and crops couldn't grow in the salt-saturated soil. The ecological damage lasted longer than the immediate death toll. International aid was almost impossible because the transportation infrastructure was completely destroyed. Remote islands remained cut off for months, with survivors eating bark and leaves to stay alive. These weren't just weather events. They were civilization-changing disasters that killed millions and altered the course of human history. What's the most extreme weather you've witnessed personally? Share your stories below and subscribe for more incredible historical disasters. What other catastrophic events should we explore?